All right, everyone, kind of make your way in here, and we'll get started with forum here. Well, good morning. I'm kind of pleased that we sort of brought a little bit of AdAmAn-worthy weather to welcome you guys. It's nothing to them, but it's more of a challenge for us to get here. So this morning we have AdAmAn. And I have Dan Stuart and Dawn Sanborn here representing. Just a quick few bullet points about who these guys are. Dan is the current president of AdAmAn from 2018 on. He was a vice president for several years before that. He actually wrote the words to the AdAmAn song. There is such a thing, and I'm really hoping that we hear the AdAmAn song today. I'm kind of curious. Here's another funny little interesting factoid. He found a volleyball in the woods at bar camp in the mid-90s, and then he helped maintain an annual "how long can we keep it in the air" tradition. Who knows, maybe he'll give us a demo of that too, I don't know. Dan has climbed all of Colorado's 14ers, as well as a handful of the 13ers. Dawn Sanborn, Dawn and Dan. Dawn Sanborn was the president from 2010 to 2018. He is the certified fireworks starter, the shooter, from 2007 to present. So he's the guy responsible for all the bangs up there. That's a pretty cool job. He created and maintains the AdAmAn.org website, so you should check that out. He's climbed 44 of Colorado's 14ers and has climbed a number of the 13ers as well, and a lot of international peaks too. So that's a lot of facts. I'm sure they're going to have a much more interesting presentation for you. So let's welcome AdAmAn.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for staying around and listening to us. This is what we consider perfect weather, so we're glad to have you here. I'm going to actually turn it over to Don to get started.
Yeah, we're gonna tag team this thing. At least I'll do the first two slides. If I get real tired, I'll take a nap and let Dan do the rest. First off, we like to show this slide just to let you know, as far as we know, we're the only group that has its own meme that equates us to representing Colorado. So that we didn't make this; it's just we found it on the web, and it's kind of fun. And then I have to say, last winter I did a number of presentations to different groups, and so I did a presentation to some elementary kids at the Air Force Academy, and then I followed that up with a presentation to the retired professors of Colorado College. And I thought, well, I need to beef this presentation up for professors, so I came up with the AdAmAn theorem. And so, of course, you can read the theorem, as long as fireworks are involved, you can get anybody to do anything. And of course, the corollary on this one is that the AdAmAn members are stupid. I'll let you say something about our projects.
Okay. Well, we'll talk a little today about the 100th anniversary projects that we worked on for the last 3 years or so. The club was started with a climb in 1922, so we thought probably in 2020, in the depths of the pandemic, that it was time to get busy and prepare for our centennial. This was one of the results of that. The governor actually declared December 31st, 2022 as AdAmAn Day in Colorado. And one of the things we worked on, the club had done a book in 1972-73 to celebrate 50 years in existence. Some of you may have known Jim Bates. I know all of you know Ted Lindeman. Ted was climbing already in 1972 and 3. So we thought it was time to update that book, and we've done that. This book, I'm supposed to say, this book makes a perfect Christmas gift. So it's available in the Founders Hall right next door. So with this book, we had a number of people in the club step forward and work on this. You see Ted's name up there and his brother Carl. Carl actually did the layout for the book. And in the book, I'll mention a couple of things. We have an introduction in there by Dick Lamb. Dick climbed with the club in the 70s a couple of times. He climbed when he was first elected governor. He wasn't yet governor, but about to start his term, and then climbed again a couple of years later. What I learned when I was preparing this book, I'd reached out to him and said, would you do an introduction for the book? He said, oh, I'd be delighted. And so we sent something back and forth, and then he died. So I reached out to Dottie Lamb and said, this is what we were working on. I'm not sure what to do now. And she said, oh, he'd love for that to be in the book. And of course, she tweaked it a little bit because she wanted me to know that she had applied to climb with the club when he climbed, and they turned her down. So the club, until 1983, had never invited a woman to climb, and they'd had women applying. I know as far back as the 1930s, there were some women applying. So she wanted it in the introduction that she and Dick both were delighted when Sue Graham became the first female to be invited as a guest, and Sue later became the first female member of the club. So you can see that we organized this book by decade, and so we've told some great stories throughout the last 100 years. We've got information in there about everything from families involved to, so the Lindemans are highlighted in that section. Wind chill, I see, is involved in the book, and a number of other things, but the stories really start in the 1920s, and I don't know if you can read that, but I'm going to read a little of this one to you just because it's fun to read. It says, when you know the whole story, it's amazing that the AdAmAn Club survived beyond the second climb in 1923. Actually there were 5 members. We call them the Frozen Five, but they divided into 2 groups because they were inviting some guests the second year. So 5 of them left the morning of December 31st from Manitou Springs at 9 a.m. to climb the peak. And in winter, that's a challenge to do that in one day. We do it in 2 now. But it was 19 degrees below zero in Manitou. They packed skis for the deep and drifting snow which covered the cog railway tracks. That's the way they went up in those early years. They carried only 2 canteens of water, one of which froze and burst along the way, so they had to melt snow to drink. 10 hours later, exhausted and numbed by a high-altitude blizzard, they arrived at the summit house to find that the snow had drifted up to the roof. They were able to climb over the snowbank and enter the building by the tower door on the 2nd floor. Only then did they determine that one of their party, and the historical record does not identify who, had abandoned his pack about a mile down the tracks, and it had some of the fireworks in them. So they were able to retrieve that pack in time for the show. The temperature on the summit was 37 below zero, and the wind in the days before wind chill could only be described as fierce. So the book goes on and tells lots of different stories. Each decade has a little decade in brief series of facts there, and I gave this book to my sister to read as we were preparing it, and she looked through the whole book, and I said, so what do you think? And she said, I didn't know baby Ruths were invented in the 1920s.
Yeah, I just want to mention, I like to talk about this page here just because my grandfather was a member. He became a member in 1940. His name was Don Laurie. And so he had a jewelry shop here in town, and he designed the first AdAmAn pin. And they were pure gold, and I think they were like, I can't read it now, but it's like $1.80 or something. Oh, 85 cents each. So we went through another set of pins, and then when I was president, we were out of pins. We needed to have some more, so I got some more done. I redesigned them a bit to actually look like Pikes Peak on them, and we did pure gold again. They were $40 a piece. So just a couple things I wanted to mention. I thought we should mention, kind of related to the church. Of course, Dan mentioned Ted Lindeman, and you probably all know the Lindemans. And so Ted, of course, was president of the club for 10 years. His father was president of the club. And as Dan mentioned, his brother laid out the book. And then I thought I might mention my grandmother played the organ here, probably in the 20s to 40s, somewhere in there. She ended up helping the First Methodist Church buy their organ, and she thought it was the best organ in town, so she went and played at the First Methodist Church for like another 30 years. Verda Laurie was her name. Anyway, let you go on.
So these are some pages out of the book. The one on the lower right there is one we never show our insurance carrier. This is Jim Bates, who some of you may have known, was a fixture in Colorado Springs. He was a photographer at D-Day. He's just loaded the fireworks into the tube there and then set it off, and it says that he's saying a very brief prayer.
This is actually George Lindeman here.
Oh, thank you, Don. That on the lower left there, holding the bomb, about to put it into the mortar tube, is George Lindeman. And this was 2021, our first adventure in the new Summit House. So we were glad to have a place to actually get a group photo.
All right. So we'll talk a little bit about how the club started. I used to give presentations, and of course, after 100 years, I think the story of how the club started has sort of changed, by word of mouth or something. And so at one point, I was looking at some early accounts of how the club started, and they didn't all match each other, and they didn't match what we were telling people. And so we pulled together a group, and some AdAmAn members, some local historians, and we all gathered down at the Pioneer Museum and went through a bunch of old newspaper articles and things, and discovered that how the club had started was way different than what we were telling people. So the story I used to like to tell was that basically it was like this group of 5 guys on a whim decided to go climb Pikes Peak on New Year's Eve, and that they hiked up the Cog Railway, and they picked up some flares left behind by the rail crew, and they broke into the Summit House, and they set off the flares and made a bonfire out of railroad ties. And so it turns out most of that didn't happen. It's possible that they did do some of those things in previous years, and I'll just explain that when we started looking at it, it turned out that Fred and Ed Morath came up with the idea to do the fireworks, and they had actually climbed Pikes Peak 10 or 11 times before that in winter, and the year before for sure on New Year's Eve. They had, so it's possible on these earlier climbs when they went up by themselves, they might have broken into the Summit House and done some of these things. But they'd actually climbed the peak. I think Fred had climbed Pikes Peak 30 times before the first what we think of as the first AdAmAn climb. But basically they went to the Gazette-Telegraph and asked the Gazette, said we got this idea, we want to do this shoot fireworks from the summit of the peak, and so the Gazette agreed to sponsor them and help pay for the fireworks. And so they started writing articles sometime before then. Here's December 17th, 1922. They started, they had this plan, and at first it was just Ed and Fred, and then they added Willis McGee, and then Fred Barr, here's a picture of Fred and Ed Morath on the peak in 1918. And then they got John Garrett, a local fireworks supplier and gun shop owner, to provide fireworks for the event. And then the last person added to the group was Harry Stanley. So of course Fred Barr was the trail builder. Harry Stanley came on as a photographer for the Gazette-Telegraph. And they actually were getting letters back from around the country, because the Gazette was writing these articles, and they would go out on the AP, and then people would write letters back and say you're crazy or whatever. But then they had a plan that when they got up there at 9 o'clock, they would shoot off a flare. They'd light a flare to let everybody know they were okay. A green, kind of green and red if they needed help or not. And then John Garrett agreed he was going to shoot a firework off from the roof of the Gazette-Telegraph to let them know that they saw the flare. So they did that. They lit this thing at 9 o'clock. John Garrett shot off his firework from the Gazette, and then the city engineer dimmed the lights of the city to let them know that they'd been seen. And all the computers in town quit. So in any event, they did it. It was a one-day climb up the Cog Railway, and then we don't hear about the result until January 2nd. We'll see that in a minute. But of course, they had to come back down to tell everybody what happened, and they spent the night and came down on the 1st, and then of course it showed up in the paper on the 2nd. But they called themselves the Gazette-Telegraph New Year's Eve Watch Party at the time. So here's the group. Of course, Harry Stanley's taking the photo. This is from Fred Barr's scrapbook, and the condition. You can see the conditions on the summit. So when they reported how things went, well, at midnight, 10 minutes before midnight, it was clear, and then a storm came in right about then, so they ended up lighting flares. They had put them kind of across the face a bit, and then they had some rockets as well, and they shot the rockets. Nobody saw the rockets. Well, nobody saw anything at midnight, and then the clouds cleared up about 10 minutes after midnight, and the flares were still running, so people could see the flares. But that was the extent of that first year. So in any event, that was the very first climb. And then just shortly after that, in March, it took them a few months to forget about how miserable they were and rethink that it might be fun to do it again in the future. So they decided it was such a great thing they should keep doing it. And Fred came up with this idea of adding one member a year. So AdAmAn became the name of the group. And of course, spell it kind of funkily. Took the extra D off ad. And capitalize the A's so they look like mountain peaks. And then I like to say it wasn't all fun and games. That here's McCrae Tavern or McCrae Lunchroom downtown, and they had made pies for all the guys before the climb to see them off. And so we don't know how far the pies made it, if they carried them very far or just ate them right away. This picture's in the book. In this presentation, we've tried not to put too much of what's in the book in the presentation, so to encourage you to buy the book. And I should say the books are for sale out here on the way out, and they make great Christmas presents. So this one is in the book, and I just like to show it because it's kind of fun to see. You have to lean back to show something at night. The camera lens has to be open for a long time. And so you get this kind of ghosting of people. And so there's a guy that actually starts on the left and goes clear across, and you can see the trail of the flare that he had to light the firework, and then he's lighting off the rocket over on the far right. So anyway, that's kind of a fun little thing. The climb kind of turned into a major effort over time. They switched over to Bar Trail. And of course, gear weighed a ton, and they changed to two-day hike like we do now. Go up to Bar Camp, spend the night, and then go up to the top. And so they used burros and or horses to pack gear and food up to bar camp. And then after Fred Barr passed away, then bar camp fell into disrepair, and so they took big canvas tents and things, and slept outside for a number of years until the cabin became a nonprofit, and we ended up with caretakers there now all year round. And then early in the 30s, they added radio transmission, and so it started out with Joe Rohrer, who started KRDO in 1935. In November of 1935, he took all this equipment up to the Summit House, and they did a test where they flew a plane around above the summit, and they transmitted to the plane, which in turn transmitted down to KOA in Denver, and then transmitted out to 50 radio stations across the country. And so that worked out, and that became a bit of a pattern then for them. Transmitters weren't strong enough to transmit clear to Colorado Springs, and so at least the ones they could use on the peak. And so they eventually then started carrying radios with them, and they'd bring soldiers from Fort Carson to carry their radios, and young guys, and then and they would do a radio broadcast once an hour. And to do that, they had the Air Force flying overhead. They would fly a C-130 over every hour to do the transmission on the radio. So they had to stop wherever they were at the point in time when they were going to transmit. But then, of course, with time, radios get smaller and smaller. And so here on the lower left, you can see this guy, Channel 13. He's got a little radio on his hip. And of course, he's letting Dick Lamb talk on the radio. And then, so you can imagine that for a while, the organization of this thing was horse packers, the climbers, the radio people, the Air Force, and then four-wheel drive club, which would come up and give the guys a ride down generally from Timberline down, because they didn't in the old day. Well, before 2003, the road was closed from October to May. So, just a real quick. This is when Fred Barr passed away. The club started the cairn in his memory on the side of the trail above Timberline, and the range riders put up a sign with it. And of course, a wooden sign in those conditions didn't last very long. But the cairn's still there, and the club has added rocks to it over the years. It's gigantic, and you can even see it on Google Earth if you look on Google Earth. So just a picture of fireworks laid out in the Summit House, and so as Dan mentioned, that you saw the guys getting ready to shoot the fireworks. They do like a bucket brigade out the door to where the firework mortars were. So they'd run past the fireworks down the line. The last guy in that case was George Lindemann putting it in the mortar. Jim Bates lights it and ducks, and then some young guys get the job of reaching in the mortar and pulling any debris out before they put the next firework in. And here's another one with the guy ducked down. Just real quick, we like to mention the AdAmAn Club. They formed to poke fun at the AdAmAn Club, and they were in Cascade. They would their husbands would stay home and bake cookies for them, and they would walk up Pyramid, up to the top of Pyramid, and they'd do sparklers and sing Helen Reddy's song "I Am Woman," and then they would drink some pink champagne and then go back down. So they were pushing, and they were pretty active, especially in the early 90s, and so they were pushing the club. And of course, as soon as the club added Sue Graham as the first woman in the AdAmAn Club, then they needed to add a man to their group. So they added my uncle, Nick Sanborn, as the first male member of the AdAmAn Club. And then, unfortunately, he got a brain tumor, and he died from a brain tumor before he could climb with them. And so no man will go near him now. But my cousins went to in his place, and I walked over to the edge of the peak, and looked down and gave them a call on the cell phone and got to listen to them doing their thing. And I heard a woman yell, "Women rule and men drool." So they're much, I don't know what, they've kind of lost their steam a bit. I don't know that they're necessarily active anymore. And of course, we've added a number of women now to the group. This is just an old picture of bar camp. Now there's a deck in front of it, and of course they've got some of the horses there packed. And then here are Ted Lindemann and Carl, his brother. And again, Carl worked on the book. And Ted holds the record for the most climbs. He's climbed 50 times. And then we've got a fun picture of him. This is another one we don't like to show to the insurance company. But,
I always like to say this is the last known photo of Ted Lindemann. He's standing on top of the mortars where the fireworks come out.
Yeah. Okay, and then our most recently added female member, Priscilla Clayton. And then we've got just a few pictures here, a series of pictures here that when we were working on the book, Cindy Bowles, our photographer, she kept wanting to put pretty pictures in the book, and we're like, well, those are great, but we need to tell a story, you know. So we didn't put all the pretty pictures that she wanted, so I tried to throw a few in here instead. So we got just a few fun pictures of the group, kind of climbing in the snow. This is fun cloud formations we had one year. And then somebody said we needed more pictures of fireworks, so we added this into the. So the guy's just holding some of the fireworks. Jim Bates is on the right. The right, yeah. And then this was a couple years ago when we had really bad weather, and so we ended up not shooting the fireworks because we shot some flares up and couldn't see them, and nobody in the Springs could see them. So we ended up not shooting the show that year. I think that's the first time we didn't shoot it since I started climbing. And then there's a shot by Mark Reese from the Gazette-Telegraph from the burn scar from the Waldo Canyon fire. And then a little series of fireworks. These are the real fireworks pictures we added.
One thing I thought was interesting about these photos, this was our 100th anniversary show. And often when we're on top of the peak, when the weather moves in, we can't see anything through those clouds. But we were just hoping that by shooting through the cloud, we'd be able to see the fireworks from Colorado Springs. And we were in touch with people in the city saying, oh yeah, we can see them. So they kept the show going.
Yeah, generally, it's really unusual for us not to shoot them. Either the Springs can see them or we can see them, and we figure if we can see them, that's good enough. And then finally, a picture of the shadow of Pikes Peak out over the plains, which we often get to see, again, depending on the weather. All right, so I'll let Dan talk about the alley.
Thanks. Well, I will mention that we talk about those Frozen Five, and Don told that story, and I read the story of the next year. Ed Morath was one of those two brothers, one of the Frozen Five. After that second climb, Ed moved to Florida and never climbed again with the brothers. So, he at least had common sense. What we did in preparation for our 100th anniversary, we walked around downtown with people from the Downtown Partnership and said, we want to do some kind of piece of art, some sculpture or something that would commemorate that. We knew the range riders had a corner at Cascade and Pikes Peak, and so they took us to 8 different spots downtown, and they said, well, we were thinking a sculpture would be nice here, how about over here? And we looked around, we walked through the alley that is next to what used to be the Ritz and is Colorado Craft now, between there and the Hibbard building. It's an east-west alley, and it was full of 30 food dumpsters. So it was pretty fragrant, but we could see Pikes Peak, and we thought, well, that's really our primary criteria. So we said, well, this could be AdAmAn Alley. And then it just sort of developed from there. We met with an amazing group of people for a couple of years. And you can see some of our support here. Colorado Springs Utilities got involved early on, and they said, if you're going to redo this alley, we have utilities underground that are more than 100 years old. They ended up finding wooden pipes down underground there. So they did a whole lot of preliminary work. They'd had it on their list for a long time. The Downtown Partnership had wanted to start an alley project to rehab alleys, and so this became kind of the catalyst for that effort. So we worked not only with the city and with CSU, we had Lida Hill Philanthropies was a huge contributor. She actually paid for the arch and the firework lights that go above the arch. We approached Stuart Coppage, who was the principal with RTA Architects. They actually have an office in the Hibbard building, so they look out on that alley. And we said, and they had designed the Summit House, so we knew them, but we said, could you help us with the design for this alley? And he said, not only will we help, we'll do it for free. So that was a huge help. And then Jim Johnson from G.E. Johnson said they would provide a project manager for us for no charge. Keep in mind, we're a group of mostly introverted climbers. We're not fundraisers. We don't, some people in the club would say we don't do art, but we wanted to do something to commemorate the club, and really our idea was we wanted something downtown that would celebrate Pikes Peak. I was frankly not pushing celebrating the AdAmAn Club, but people around the table said, oh, we love you, let's get AdAmAn celebrated. So it ended up that way. And then the Downtown Partnership was a huge partner with us. You can see a variety of people who were involved in this. The City of Colorado Springs through Matt Mayberry at the Pioneers Museum. Greg Johnson at RTA Architects designed that arch. Susan Edmondson and her staff, Chelsea and Michelle were both part of that effort. And then some of the business owners around, or the building owners around, Dave Lux and Chuck Murphy, both were sitting in on those meetings and contributing as well. So what we tried to do then was put some murals in the alley. There are 5 or maybe as many as 8 distinct murals that kind of entice people to come into the alley, and we're trying to celebrate Pikes Peak. It's interesting that we put trash consolidation on here. This was a big issue for the Downtown Partnership. They spent probably a year and a half working with the various trash companies, because there were multiple companies involved, trying to get somebody to agree to put trash compactors in there. So we ended up, I think, with 2, maybe 3 trash compactors, and removed the smell basically from the alley. So it was very helpful. You can see some of our preliminary designs. We were looking for mural locations in the alley. That's Pikes Peak at the top of the screen, and Colorado Avenue at the bottom. Nevada's on the right, and Tejon is on the left. We had a group called Creative Fabrications in Colorado Springs design or create the archway that Greg Johnson had designed. And it's supposed to be the Frozen 5 on top, although I noticed one of them is John Garrett, who was actually our 7th member, the sporting goods store owner who supplied those fireworks. He's up there, I can tell from his mustache. So on the left was the artist's rendering of what we were going to do. This was Greg Johnson's first design, and we got pretty darn close when we finally got it up there. The fireworks screen above ended up being quite an engineering feat, because we had to attach it to the buildings on the side. We added extra support because we started talking about, well, what happens if we have an ice storm? Now, we don't want ice hanging from that thing and causing a problem. So the screen actually has two screens up there facing both east and west. So any of you been downtown at night to see what this looks like? Just a couple of people. It is worth going down. This time of year, it's, I believe, Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights, from the time it's dark till 10 o'clock at night. But we'll give you a sense of what that's like. Here's one of the murals done by a guy named Prater. Yeah. So you can see Pikes Peak in the distance there on Pikes Peak Avenue. And this is kind of to symbolize teamwork. We don't actually hold a rope when we're going up the mountain, but he wanted to do that, and the peak is there on the left above the climbers. That was kind of a nod to the indigenous people who referred to it as Sun Mountain. If you want to see it, yeah, it's on Tejon Street. So this is one of the murals inside. An artist named Al Mack from California designed this mural with his son's face. We called it the Wonder of Fireworks, but then we had another artist create a light show to play with the mural. And so this light show goes for about 15 minutes, and it's a circle, so it continues through, but you can see how he worked with that. Here's a hiker on the left, but what he was trying to do was show the seasons of Pikes Peak. So if you stand there and watch it for that length of time, you'll see springtime and you'll see flowers blooming, and then they explode into fireworks, and you'll see leaves falling or blowing through in the fall, and various animals appearing. So we really did try to capture what it was like up on Pikes Peak. It's very, very creative, and as I say, worth a trip at night. And in fact, the Downtown Partnership held their annual dinner there. Was anybody lucky enough to go? There were 200 people there with white tablecloths stretched through that side of the alley, and they had music and really celebrating downtown in a wonderful way. I didn't hear the question. You were asking, what was the street there? It's Tejon on the west side of the alley, so you can see the fireworks from there. Actually, if you're driving, well, if you're a passenger on I-25, you can look across the city and actually see them at a couple of points. You can see that screen. Don't do it while you're driving. Yeah, I did. Yeah. And then you can create fireworks of your own. This is actually Don and his wife standing on a bench beneath the fireworks mural on the city building. The Colorado Springs got involved with us as we were doing the alley, and they said, well, we want to create some improvements in the southern leg of this alley. So this is a northwest or north and south alley on the side of the city administration building, and they put this mural up on the building. The alley's got lots and lots of detail. Here's one of the sewer grates, but it shows the AdAmAn logo in it. We had various contractors sponsor these sewer grates, and so their names are on those. There's a map, essentially, of Bar Trail that runs from one end of the alley to the other, and if you looked at a topo map, this would be the line of Bar Trail running up the mountain, and at various points on the trail, there are actually what look like USGS elevation markers that show the elevation, and then if you look on the wall of the alley, there are QR codes where you could pull up historical information or views of Pikes Peak from that. Included in that, there are leaves that are actually were embedded in the pavement. So if you've got sharp eyes, you'll see in the lower sections of the bar trail on the east end of the alley, there are oak leaves, and then they transition into aspen leaves as you get further into the alley. So it's lots of detail, and you can tell it was just people using their imagination when that committee met for 2 years.
And then our last project that we did, or have been doing related to 100th anniversary, is a documentary. So we actually started with WinStar. I worked with WinStar years ago on the 100th anniversary video of the Pikes Peak Hill Climb. And so we started them early doing video of the AdAmAn Club since we're a one-day-a-year thing. So they climbed with us a couple times. They started doing video about 8 years ago. And they either came to the top and videoed us finishing, or they climbed along with us. This year they had people embedded in the climb, and they did aerial photography, drone photography of the entire climb. They've done some drone photography of the summit and all. And then after last year's climb in the winter, we went up the Cog, and the Cog drove us up and dropped us off every so often, and we reenacted the original Frozen 5 climbing up the mountain. So you can see the camera guy taking a photo of the actors going by, and then of course playing around in the snow. And then we have Harry Stanley setting up his camera, and then when we were done with that, we went back down to their studio. Well, these were members. They're current members acting like old members. So we went down to their studio, and they sprayed the guys up they wanted to animate a photograph and make it look like it was live or moving. And so they used this fake snow to spray them up and make it look just exactly like the guys had snow on them in that original photograph. And then they played around some more with the camera, zooming in on Harry Stanley taking a picture. And this is just a still image of each of the guys kind of in their static position from that original photograph. And then they brought in they had about 30 different people come in for interviews, members. This was Elaine Summers, the mother of she was the wife of a member and the mother of members. And then they're still working. Now they're editing it. We should expect to be done with the documentary sometime early next year. So that's ongoing. And then we want to kind of close by again encourage you to buy 4 or 5 books apiece for Christmas presents. And Dan's trying to get rid of them because he doesn't want to have to store them all in his garage. So, but they're available at Mountain Chalet, Poor Richard's, Hooked on Books, and Manchester Springs Heritage Center, and then Amazon. So I think that's it. Questions?
Yeah, well, we're glad to have questions. I will say those books are stored in my garage. We did a hardcover of that book, and those are limited edition. The club 50 years ago had each chipped in a little bit extra so that a copy of that 50-year book could be given one a year to the new member of the club, and so we've done that for the last 50 years. I reported to the club that we now have enough books that we can give the 100th anniversary edition to brand new club members for the next 250 years. So questions?
Oh, real quick, one more thing I just want to say. By tag teaming this thing, I think we've gone longer than we're supposed to. And but the beauty of it is we can each blame the other guy for going too long.
Yes, question. Go ahead.
Depending on the weather, where is a good place to watch the New Year's celebration? I've never been able to see it from where we are.
Well,
We're up on Lower Gold Camp, so we're up high.
so you probably can't see the peak. Really, anywhere you can see Pikes Peak is a good place to see it. I will mention, for those of you, and I should say those of us who don't want to stay up till midnight, we have done a show every year we honor the Frozen Five at 9 o'clock by doing first some flares, but then we do 5 blasts for them. So if you want a quick view of what it looks like at 9 o'clock, you can see that. So really anywhere in Colorado Springs that you can see Pikes Peak.
2 questions. Who gives you the keys to the Summit House, or is there somebody there that meets you, especially since the road's open now? And also, how do you know you're on the trail, especially when you're above timberline, when it's snowy and the whole bit?
These days, the Summit House is open year-round. I have very vivid memories of getting up there before that was the case, and somebody was there with a lighter on the lock trying to thaw it so that we could actually get a key in and open it. Bad planning that year. And your second question was? How do we find the trail? The new member every year is the one who leads the hike. We basically turn it over to them. And so the new member is typically somebody who has been a guest for anywhere from 5 to 10 years, depending on if they're moving up the line in being able to be a new member. So you have to show your lack of common sense and climb with us for that long. But essentially, you can find the trail these days. Frankly, there are runners that use that trail a lot. Typically, when we get above Bar Camp, we're breaking trail, and it gets deeper and deeper. And usually by the A-frame, which is essentially timberline, some leaders say, "I don't see the trail. We're going this way," and they just start going up because we're in snow. Sometimes it's knee deep, sometimes it's hip deep, depends on the wind. Yeah.
You have to say, if the new member, if we don't find the Summit House, then the new member is not a member for very long.
Barb, you had a question?
Do you still use pack animals to bar camp?
We do not. No. We did that. The pictures Don was showing with those heavy canvas tents. Camp Carson and Fort Carson later supplied those tents, and then we enlisted a couple of different horse folks in town to supply the pack animals. They tried, I think, a couple of times to take them above Bar Camp, and that didn't work out very well. So, no, we haven't used them since probably in the last 50 years. Somebody in the hall next door was asking me how she could do this, how she could become a member. And I said, typically, you need to apply to climb. We've broadened our outreach in recent years to try to diversify the club more. And so that application for the club is online starting about Labor Day. We get applications in. We've had 30 or 40 applications every year in recent years. We usually have about 10 guest spots. So it's hard to choose from that list. You need a pretty good climbing resume to show you're comfortable in the mountains, that you love the mountains. And then sometimes we tell people that patience is a virtue. And so if they've applied and haven't been selected, we want them to keep applying, because after 3 or 4 years, we'll say, they really want to go. We'd better encourage them or invite them along. And so sometimes we do that with people as well. Yes.
As I'm walking there, what are the plans for screening your documentary next year? Is it going to be showing in the theaters, or?
That's a good question. WinStar has said they've identified some film festivals, and they'd actually like to do that. We've only seen the first minute of the documentary at this point, and the slides that Don was showing you, they took that, they start in the first minute of the documentary showing Harry Stanley setting up this 7-pound Graflex camera, and the guys working their way off the roof, standing in the drift, and then it kind of turns black and white, and there's the classic photo. So it's a really creative entry to it. I'm I'm very hopeful that the rest of the documentary is going to be just as good.
Yeah, I have a couple questions. I may have missed this, but how many people will be climbing this year?
We typically have 32 people climbing because that's the capacity of bar camp, and we spend the night at bar camp. So we basically fill up both cabins there and have a couple of lean-tos for those who have better sleeping bags. And so 32 people.
Okay. And my other question was, when you talked about the AdAmAn Alley and that there were limited days a week that it's lit this time of year, Thursday through Saturday, I think you said. I mean, is it different in the summer or other seasons? Is it lit more days of the week?
We're in the first year of that
Oh,
operation.
okay.
So yes, in the summertime, I believe the lights go every night of the week, but it's in control of the Downtown Partnership now, and so it's the light show that's limited. The alley, of course, is open, and it's wonderful to go in the daytime and see the detail in the alley. You can get a better view of the murals that way, and nobody asked me to sing, so I'm really happy about that.
Any other questions?
Yes.
How many fireworks, whatever you want to call them, did they set off at the very beginning in the 20s and 30s? And how many do you set off now? And how heavy are those packages?
Yeah, the very first climb, I don't actually know how many they did, but they had 150 pounds of fireworks. And so they had to split that between 5 guys, and they carried them to the top. I don't think they carried them up more than that first year. It's possible they might have the second year, but basically they started then taking the fireworks up ahead of time in October on the train, storing them in the Summit House, and then they'd just be there for them when they got up there. And now we take them up. We generally take them up like the day after Christmas, and we drive them up. We have a specially built fire trailer that we shoot the fireworks out of, and that we shoot 66-inch shells. I don't know how much they weigh. We wouldn't want to carry them up there, but in any event, we take all those things up ahead of time and get them staged, and then all we do on the 31st, we just have to put the fireworks in the mortars in the trailer and wire them up. So.
Any other questions? All right, one more in the back.
I want to know how much drinking was involved when they first decided to go up.
You know, I've done the peak 30 times now on New Year's Eve, and that question about current use of alcohol sometimes comes up when we have new guests. I remember one guy years ago brought beer to bar camp thinking that was a good idea. Generally speaking, it's not a good idea to mix alcohol and altitude and fireworks, right? So we don't do that. And that first year, I suspect it was the same, although you remember in those years, people thought that brandy on a St. Bernard was something to get you warm.
Any last questions? Well, this has been really wonderful, guys. Thank you so much for bringing AdAmAn to us. And don't forget, there are books for sale out in the Founders Room. I think we all know now. Thanks so much.